Hey there, everyone. Welcome to Nerd Nation Discussions. The topic for this show's obviously Computex 2019, which has been going on all this week, and there's a lot to talk about. I believe we should get started with the gorilla in the room, and that would be AMD. AMD is going after Intel's lunch money right now. That's for sure. That being said, one of our writers actually covered the AMD chipsets Monday in an article going over everything that was announced but from AMD when it comes to the Ryzen series anyway, going over specs, pricing, and all those other fun details. But it's just worth going in a little bit deeper and talking about, just because it's really interesting, and considering the price points and stuff like that. If you've been waiting to upgrade your computer or get a new processor and stuff like that, my suggestion to you would be wait till July, because the new line of Ryzen Series 3 Zen 2 processors are all coming out July 7th. The day after my birthday, actually, believe it or not.
It seems like this year at Computex, AMD, they're really just hammering in. They're just really making elbow space for like the home desktop ecosystem. More so than even before, and Intel's just trying to hang in there. Well, the thing is that they still have, total dominance, market saturation, like across everything still. But they're really, really pushing for, like, we do laptops. If you want a laptop, that's going to have a good battery life. You're going to want to go Intel still. That's what they're going for.
Yeah. However, when it comes to the desktop market, the things that AMD was showing, very interesting, because they compared their 7 series Ryzen to Intel's current i9, the 9900K, I believe, and both the 3700 and the 3800 both beat out Intel's top tier PC processor.
And Intel's, 8-core 16-thread part, their i9 9900K, that's like a 500 some odd part, dollar odd part, and
AMD's beating them out both technically and price-wise.
Meanwhile, AMD is coming out with a product that's hits that $499 price point, that's beating out like an Intel processor that's like $1,200.
Yeah, it is the 12-core i9 9920X is the $1,189, nearly $1,200 processor that the Ryzen 9 3900X is just trouncing, with upwards of 18% efficiency or power over this nearly $1,200 processor for only $500. That's rather significant. That is very significant.
Something I could say that I'm observing between AMD and Intel at the desktop level, it just... Okay, so I was going to say that Intel's chips, they're going to clock higher. Okay?
Yeah.
They're going to clock higher. I mean, so these high mainstream Intel chips, like these 9900, these are ones that reach, like 5 gigahertz and stuff. But the thing is, a lot of these chips that reach those speeds, I don't think they do that well necessarily, like on air cooling. You know what I mean? Like these ones that are clocking that well. I think you need some water. I actually, if you're spending $500 on a damn CPU, you probably should be water cooling. Overclocked processor should be freaking water cooling.
You want that processor to stay at a proper temperature consistently.
So even if like these new AMD processors, they're claiming that they're going to be beating, you know, what Intel has out right now and in IPC. The Intel ones are still going to be clocked higher, so maybe they could potentially be faster than AMD's just because of the higher clock speed. But the thing is, AMD, of course, is still like undercutting them by like hundreds of dollars at like these different, you know, performance tiers.
Yes.
And you don't need to water cool the AMD processors to get those benefits. People coming into this thinking like Ryzen was gonna, you know, be clocking at like 5 gigahertz. That was just like really unrealistic that they would be able, because
true, but at the same time, the Ryzen 9 does have a boost close to 5 gigahertz. It's 4.6 gigahertz.
I mean, at the end of the day, I'm totally leaning more towards Intel. I mean, ever since the first generation of Ryzen, it's when you put them side by side, I've always been leaning towards AMD. So yeah, Intel has like better clock speeds, dude. It's like,
but the gap is narrowing, is what we can say at the very least.
Yeah, and you know, Intel's what they came out with at the desk to you know, kind of combat, you know, AMD's offerings. I guess they had was the 9900KS, and pretty much it's just like a 9900 that out of the box,
specifically tuned for gaming. I believe they pitched it as for gamers and content creators.
I think they said just like out of the box, it clocks at like 5 gigahertz on like all the cores, or half of them, or more of them. It's just a more refined 9900, and I guess for people that like aren't tinkering with anything with their, you know, 500 some odd dollar CPU unlocked processor, maybe there would be some advantage. But I think people that already, you know, are experienced overclockers, they would already be getting the performance that the KS would be offering. But I guess just out of the box, it would.
However, I will say they did also announce some software that helps overclocking and stuff like that as part of their keynote. Like, it'll go through like the various things and and it'll basically overclock itself for you. It's like self adjusts the clock speed of the processor based off what it determines your computer can handle, which I think is very interesting.
That really just sounds like something that should already exist, but it just doesn't really. It's not really implemented. Auto overclocking thing, because the thing was, when you get a product, it's designed so that 99.99 some odd percent of the products, they're just going to work, or essentially 100% of the products are just going to work at stock speed.
Yes.
Okay, that's how that works. And then the ones that the processors that are unlocked, there's usually some sort of headroom on how much a processor can be overclocked, and there's something called silicon lottery, where processors that, if you're fortunate enough to get one that can overclock really well, it can it could be an outlier. There are outliers. There are some unlocked processors that probably can't really overclock all that much, and then there's other ones that can overclock a lot. And I think when professional reviewers, when they get like their review samples, those are usually cherry picked so that they get ones that are going to overclock really.
Yeah.
So it's you. So it's like I'm sometimes skeptical when I hear people talking about like, oh, I got my processor, clocked up to 5.1 gigahertz or something, or some really high number. Kind of skeptical.
Just the fact that they put the forethought into making this software is a good thing. Like you said, it should have been a thing for a very long time, and it hasn't been. And I will admit, I've known people that have really fucked up their computers because they didn't know what they were doing, and they tried overclocking their stuff, and it can be painful, especially to the wallet.
I think part of the reason why there isn't a lot of overclocking stuff, that like you can't just like press a button to overclock. There's all these different variables in your PC, products that are coming from different sources. Your RAM is a component that itself can be overclocked. Your CPU can be overclocked, of course. But just because different things are coming from different places, for them to all cooperate, to have software that could just get everything to play nice and be stable. I think that's why there isn't like just some universal overclocking software. It's
it doesn't need to be universal. It'd be just nice if AMD and Intel both had their own, which Intel finally is getting their own. But instead of having to do it through the BIOS or however it is, I don't know. I've never overclocked anything. But the fact that the software exists and that it goes through multiple tests each time before it pushes it up a gigahertz or 0.1 gigahertz and stuff like that. I believe the test sample that they showed, they were able to bring up the processor, probably the 9900 KS that they were showing off, up to 5.2 gigahertz.
I'll tell you my experience overclocking. The most recent PC that I've built was in 2017. It has a Ryzen 5 1600, and when I initially got it, I just used the box cooler, so no aftermarket cooler, but it's I think it's the Wraith Spire cooler. It's not the Stealth, it's the Spire.
Mm-hmm.
And it's considered one of the best box coolers that's been around, because I know AMD's like FX box coolers were pretty shitty, and Intel's box coolers are, I guess they've been pretty mediocre over the years. But the Spire was getting good reviews from what I could see. And I overclocked the CPU to 3.7 gigahertz. And I think the base normally on the 1600, I recall, it was something like 3.4. So normally everything's running at 3.4. So then I overclocked it to 3.7. And it seemed stable for months and months. And then all of a sudden, I think it was the overclock, but all of a sudden my PC would just turn off for some reason.
Got too hot.
No, it wasn't heat. It wasn't heat because
power draw.
Some sort of instability, probably relating to the voltage or something. It wasn't anything like, oh, my power supply was too weak. It wasn't that. It wasn't temperatures. It was just some sort of I would think some kind of voltage instability. Apparently, the motherboard I picked, it's missing some sort of, I think it's like just like a common overclocking feature. I think it's called like LLC or something like that. My motherboard doesn't have some sort of common overclocking.
So in other
Like
words, the motherboard wasn't made to allow overclocking.
No, I think it is. It's an X3. I forgot if it was X350 or X370. It's not an A or a B board. See, if it was an A board, yeah, you can't overclock on one of those. You can overclock on the B boards and the X boards. And I don't know, just there's something missing on my motherboard that the thing is, if you were like an experienced overclocker, someone who's like been doing it for years, I'm sure that they could like figure out whatever they need to do to get it to work. But
yeah,
after that, it seemed like my PC was just turning off by itself like every week or two. So
that doesn't seem good.
Yeah. So then I just reverted back to the stock speed, and I've just been going with that. But it was weird how it was so stable for so long. Like it seemed like it was stable for close to half a year, and then all of a sudden, like every week or two, it would just turn off. So that's my experience with overclocking.
Even people who know what they're doing when it comes to overclocking, like for example, let's use Linus Tech Tips for as an example. Like some of their videos where they do overclock things, they do it incrementally. Like, is this stable? Is this stable? No, that's not stable. Let's go back to the one that was stable, and stuff like that. And so having a software that goes through that tests things multiple times to get you to the point where it says, okay, this is stable. This is what your computer can efficiently run this processor or whatever else you're overclocking at a certain speed. And software like this, in my opinion, is way overdue because of that fact. It takes a lot of the trial and error out of overclocking, and it just makes it so much easier. Well, since we're talking motherboards, what's your opinion on ASUS's new take on the motherboard, the Prime Utopia?
Okay. The initial thing when I saw that was they mentioned, and we got to say, ASUS, those guys were like really excited about everything, right?
Yeah,
like
they were.
They were like.
Though to be fair, they have the right to be, but they got loud a few times when it was completely unnecessary.
Some of the later guys, they talked, yeah, just like more normal pace, but they were.
And then whenever they went to announce something,
emphatic.
Yes. Whenever they went to announce something new, they got unnecessarily loud. Despite the fact it was fairly quiet in the auditorium.
I thought some of these guys needed like capes and curly mustaches or something. I think they wanted to get maniacal.
But anyway, back to the motherboard.
Okay. The ASUS motherboard, their deal there. If they want to potentially put graphics cards on the back of the motherboard instead of putting them on the front, so there would be like a PCI slot on the back of the motherboard. And I gotta say, this is totally possible. A lot of
and their whole thought behind doing this is increased airflow too, which to help aid cooling across
have your graphics card blowing its exhaust air not on the rest of the motherboard components.
Yes,
that's what it's about, and it seems totally possible. I gotta say, a lot of PC cases, there is like an opening on
both sides.
Like
my computer has ventilation on both sides of the case. But since we were talking about it earlier, we should also point out that this new motherboard has built-in water cooling.
My God, I mean, some of the stuff that they're talking, I mean, when they're talking about built-in water cooling, it's like, what? I'm just thinking, what kind of?
It's a first off, let's mention it is a PCIe 4.0 board, which also offers built-in water cooling for the processor, increased airflow due to less traffic, I guess you could say, across the motherboard as a whole. The graphics card being relocated to a vertical position, actually, not horizontal like as usual, on the back of the motherboard. So the fan's actually exhausting out to the side, as compared to, like you said earlier, up against the actual board itself.
Hey, I gotta say, the tray that you mount a motherboard to inside a typical PC case, there's usually like a big opening in it. So if you had like a an aftermarket cooler, maybe there's like some kind of mounting bracket that you would need to install in the back. So there's you can get at things from kind of like both sides. And when I just saw this idea of them putting the graphics card in the back, I'm thinking like, okay, I'm kind of seeing somehow where they could do this, but at the same time, I'm also thinking, I think there's a lot of,
If anything, if there's not immediate adoption,
there needs to be like new designs on what a PC case.
Like I said, like I was just about to say, if there's not immediate adoption for this motherboard from those who make the cases, though keep in mind ASUS do make their own cases too, so you will most likely be able to buy an ASUS case that will function with this motherboard. However, I'm sure they'll probably like sell adapters or something, like so that if you have a different case you want to use, you can probably take out the plate that's in there and replace it with something that they'll be selling in the interim until it's more widely adopted.
To accommodate a graphics card mounted like on the back of a motherboard, there's totally going to be compatibility issues for pretty much everything that's out on the market right now. So there would just need to be like a whole new line of cases to go with the motherboard. They kind of like sell them together, market them together. Any of the cases that I've had, I don't see how the graphics card could fit in the back. Because usually the back of the motherboard, that's where you route cables.
Yeah.
You route cables back there just to hide them, to clean up, the main interior of the case. There's cases, there's just like most cases, there's just no room for anything like a graphics card sticking out there. So.
Another interesting feature about this is the I/O ports in the back are going to be fully modular, which I'm interested to see how they manage that. As well as here's a weird thing about this motherboard. It's got a 7-inch touchscreen on it, so yeah, you can manage like the fans and stuff. But who's going to use a touchscreen on the inside of their computer? Like, maybe I can understand having like some type of screen there to show and control output, like when you're installing stuff and putting it in. But like 90% of the time, 99% of the time, that touchscreen is not going to be used or even looked at.
Okay, let's say you have a case with a window. Left side of the case, there's a window. You could maybe see the screen. It could give you some feedback if you actually looked.
I guess there's a lot of windowed cases nowadays.
And they're also saying that you'd be able to control this with your phone or tablet or just other devices. Like you could be able to control this, your motherboard. I like the idea of being able to like control your motherboard and have access to the BIOS through a phone or a tablet, or really just having access to the BIOS while you're running Windows. The more you're able to do that, the better, because it's kind of annoying having to close everything out and restart your PC to get into the BIOS. And actually, from my experience, a lot of pre-built PCs
use the touchscreen. It's not. It's attached to the motherboard, Okir. It's the size of your phone, and it's attached to the motherboard. You're not using the touchscreen as the side panel of your case.
Yeah, you'd be looking through the side panel to see. Yeah, you wouldn't even be able to use the touchscreen, but you'd be able to see it. That's the thing. You'd have to take off the side of your case to actually use the touchscreen. But it's almost like you would be using the touchscreen while you're setting everything up.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. It's mainly there for like setup and stuff. But aside from that, you're not really going to use it.
You can just kind of peek inside and
check your fan efficiency or whatever.
Yeah, I almost want to say like, oh, they're going to put like a clock somewhere in there just to see what time.
Set a screensaver for it.
Look inside your PC to see what time it is. Yes, that is some. It's really they're going to need to just. You want to see the temperature. You want to see like the RAM speed, the clock speed, any sort of percentages of whatever stats are useful. They ought to have them there, but usually the typical thing is, oh, and how about if it changes colors if it gets too hot? You know, it starts blinking and shit.
That's not going to happen. It's not there to be used often, which makes it silly because this whole thing is just going to drive up the price of the motherboard overall. Anyway, what we're talking about. This motherboard is probably going to cost like $1,000. This motherboard is going to cost the same price as a flagship smartphone, just because of all the features and bells and whistles it has. This is not going to be a cheap thing when and if it ever comes out, because
this is like
it's a prototype. It's a
concept.
It's a concept motherboard. I don't even think it even exists yet. Since we're talking about PCI Express 4, it should be noted that all AMD chips will be supported on PCI Express 4 and supporting PCI Express 4 and GDDR6, which makes sense considering their graphics cards will make use of GDDR6. And we do know that the new line of cards that are built on the Navi architecture are the RX 5700.
Something I got to say about PCI Express 4, it's not all about graphics cards. It's also about PCI Express. There's other uses for
solid
PCI
state
Express.
drives, like the NVMe.2s and stuff like that.
This is going to like allow for NVMe SSDs to get much, much faster. Whether you have applications that are actually going to be able to take advantage of that, that's to be seen. Things have to adapt.
Okay, now that we're talking about NVMe SSDs, it's worth noting that the ASUS Prime Utopia board is going to have four NVMe SSD slots, which basically gives you room for plenty of space. Like, that's an insane amount of space, especially considering how big these NVMe SSDs are getting nowadays.
Most of the time, when I was looking for a motherboard 2 years ago for my Ryzen system, I wanted it to have at least one M.2 slot that could run an NVMe SSD, and it does. I think if I'd gotten an A board or a B board, it might not have had that. But getting an X board, there totally was that. And it's still open. My PC has 4 storage drives in it, 2 SATA SSDs and 2 SATA hard drives. I have not had the privilege of using a NVMe drive yet.
They're getting cheaper, but the lower storage ones are getting cheaper. but that's only because they're getting higher in storage capacity now. I believe we even have 1 terabyte as NVMe SSDs now. This makes the ASUS Prime Utopia viable, considering I actually don't think it has any regular interface for generic general hard drives based off how it looks and based off what we've seen.
Wait, you're saying that ASUS Prime motherboard doesn't have SATA?
It doesn't look like it does. Did you see anything on that that suggests that it does? Because I didn't. Because the whole motherboard's covered, basically.
I think the omission of SATA is like... I don't see that being a thing. SATA is here. I mean, when you get a power supply, they still have like Molex power connectors, which would be used on like old IDE drives and like floppy disk drives and shit, man. I mean, SATA is so essential just as a base. If they're selling a damn motherboard that's gonna be like,
well, you gotta think this isn't meant for people who are attached to past things. This is a brand new take on how the motherboard's supposed to be. Like, they're trying to do away with old conventions and how things are supposed to be, and just they're going through with their vision of the future for motherboards.
Okay. So, how many M.2s did you say that this thing would have?
It's supposed to have 4 slots.
All right, just to say.
And if this thing ever does get released, we probably won't see it again for at least another year or so, which means the prices that we just saw and were shocked at today will probably be even lower, and the storage space will probably be even higher by the time it finally comes out.
Okay, listen, my motherboard, I want to say it has 6. I don't think it has 8, but I know it has at least 6 SATA ports. Okay, so you connect 6 storage devices to my motherboard just from SATA, and then there's at least 1 M.2, which, man, I could get one of these 1 terabyte Intel SSDs that I'm seeing here. That is such a man. What is going on, man? I watch all my tech deal shows. They haven't said shit.
This one just slipped under your radar, didn't it?
All right. Look, anybody watching this, yeah, look up Intel 660p series SSD. That thing just curb stomps any SATA drive you could get, and it's less than the Crucial ones. The Crucial ones have been like the most cost-effective SATA SSDs for a number of years. They've pretty much matched the performance that Samsung has. I was under the impression that SSDs, they were designed to last, like a decade. Okay. And it was like, after 10 years, technology probably would have advanced enough that if your SSD was still working, it would just be time to upgrade. And there are storage checking programs that they warn you if a hard drive is starting to malfunction, or if there's like bad sectors on it. I'm like, okay, if you're looking at getting storage for your PC, you really need to look at these NVMe M.2 drives now. These are going to perform much better than what you can get on SATA, and some of these are like the same price as the SATA ones.
Yeah, and they're about to become a lot more popular too. Because when you think about it, think about how much space a hard drive takes up. A hard drive is a brick. A hard drive's like this. And usually about this thick. I'm talking about normal hard disk drives at this point. Then you got the SSDs, the SATA SSDs, which are you cut about a third of the size off of a regular hard disk drive for the SATA SSDs. Then you get down to the NVMe SSDs. These things are the size about the size of a stick of gum. They don't take up much space, which leaves more room for cooling.
Okay.
For example,
I hope they've fixed this. I hope they've ironed this out. But these NVMe drives, they can run hot. Okay, but I'm sure I'm sure it's not really an issue. But I do know that these things run a lot hotter than a SATA SSD.
They don't have much surface area for heat dissipation, you know? Alright.
Okay, so we were talking about ASUS, we talked about AMD.
One more thing about AMD before we move on completely, and that is they only briefly talked about their RX 5700s, and we'll be getting more information before these Navi cards launch in July, and at their gaming showcase, AMD's Next Horizon gaming showcase on June 10th during E3, which will give us more information on the products themselves, price, features, and performance.